Hi, and welcome to lesson 9 of session 1. Today we're going to be looking at writing on the GED part 2. We're going to talk specifically about embedding quotes into your essay. So let's get into it. We're going to skip our intro video today and kind of just jump straight into it because I would like to work through an essay tonight also. So how to embed quotes in an essay is what we're talking about. So embedding quotations from your sources should fit smoothly into your sentences. So look at the difference between these sentences here. The first example is, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, end quote. We have a quote here, but we don't know who said it. The second example is, Franklin D. Roosevelt said, comma, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This is better because we see who said this quote, so this is all right. This is okay for our purposes. The next better example is, Franklin D. Roosevelt's claim that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, end quote, resonated with Americans. So this one's even better because it bakes the quote into the grammar of the sentence. Roosevelt's claim that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself resonated. This is now part of the sentence's grammar, and it's baked in. That's really strong. And the absolute strongest way to include that quote would be to say something along the lines of, Franklin D. Roosevelt opened his first inaugural address with chilling words, colon, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. So this last one is really just showing out. This last one is just really, hot dogging it with the colon and two different complete sentences, and talking about not only the person but also the place and some opinion about it. So there's a lot of information in this last one that we just don't have in this first one. The first one just really can't stand on its own. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, that's a good statement, and that is a quote. We don't know who said it, we don't know where it was said, and we don't know why it's important. So who said it, the context of where it was said, and why it's important are really what we're going to look at adding when we're embedding quotations. To embed a quotation, one thing that you should do and you should practice doing is using a signal phrase. So a signal phrase includes the name of the author and a verb that can introduce that quote. A good example would be, let's say the author is G. So according to G, one thing we build with language is significance. That's one way you could say, introduce this quote. Another one would be, G writes, one thing we build with language is significance. I really highly recommend, for the purposes of the GED essay, doing this second one, and just kind of getting comfortable doing this second one. You can do the other different ways of embedding a quote, but if you can consistently introduce a quote with the name of the author, a signal verb, and then the quote, you're in a good space for including evidence from the text in your essay. So this is a fine space to be in. You're good there if you can just do this, what this second example is doing. And if you're looking at this and you're like, well, what about this 98 here? What's all that going on? Don't worry about that. You don't need to have page numbers on your GED essay. You just need to have the period dropped in there, so you don't need to have a page number. A couple different other signal phrases that you might use whenever you're quoting would be writes or argues, like John Locke argues, or claims. Sandy Cheeks claims that SpongeBob is her best friend, because he is. Observes, emphasizes, remarks, different ways that you could introduce some quotes. And we're going to practice a few different ones when we get to the essay example in just a little bit too. Here's a couple more. In this one, Fanstock summarizes the most emphatic parts of a sentence, colon, if the opening and ending of a sentence are positions of relatively greater emphasis, elements in the middle of the sentence are de-emphasized. So we have the name of the person, summarizes, our action verb, and then the actual summary. Another way you can do it, and I wouldn't recommend this one for the GED just because it's a whole thing to remember. We do not use just one dialect to register, colon, often speakers and writers shift into a different language variety, Fanstock 87. So if you don't use the author's name, if you don't use the person's name who you're quoting, you have to drop it in afterwards in a citation. That's a whole nother thing that you would have to memorize, is how to do these citations and drop them in brackets like that. I wouldn't recommend it. If you put the person's name before the quote, who's saying it, you will never have to do this. So you don't have to do citations if you put their name ahead of the quote. Another quick rule that I'm just going to kind of blast through, because you're probably not going to lose a lot of points if you don't get it right, is that you only need to capitalize the first word of a quote if it follows a signal phrase and is a complete sentence. So for example, Glaser writes, comma, the usual order of sentence elements is subject, verb, complement. So this is a sentence on its own. It's all fine. It's doing everything a sentence needs to do. Because this is a complete sentence, it has a capital T. You don't need to capitalize the first word of a quote if it does not immediately follow a signal phrase or a colon. So if there's not a comma or a colon, you don't need to capitalize it. For example, Glaser writes that the usual order of sentence elements is subject, verb, complement. So because I don't have a comma here, I don't need to capitalize the T. Again, this is a lot of extra rules that you don't have to memorize if you just do a signal phrase, like G writes, or Tom suggests, Daisy remarks, Andrew states, that kind of thing. The person and then the verb and then the quote is perfectly fine for our purposes. All right, I have a pretty good video that I found that I think explains this fairly well. So we're going to watch that, and then we're going to dive into another example essay, just like we did on Monday. And I'm going to walk you through how to make an example essay out of the passage number 5 from the PDF that we're doing for Friday's work. So here is a pretty solid video I found.
Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whenever you're watching this video. Today we're going to talk about how to embed quotations. I'm Mr. Crair and I'll be helping you out. This is an area a lot of students struggle with, so let's see if we can fix this problem. It's a little bit mustered into this bigger idea of the support sandwich. We need to do a quick little recap here. Remember that when you're writing a support sandwich or you're writing any argument, there's 3 parts to it. First, you have your claim, which is your argument in your words, and then the evidence, which is what supports your argument. Now, today what we're going to talk about is using quotes from maybe a play, a poem, a book, an article to back up your claim. And then finally, your warn is what's going to tie your evidence back to your claim or provide some further analysis. But what we'll be talking about is mainly that part 2. Okay? The goal here is always to strive for fluency between what you write and what the author originally wrote. So sometimes it feels like you're writing an essay and it's your language, and then it feels like this very jilted, like, oh, and then here's the language of the author. And what we're going to try and work on here is embedding that quote. And when we embed that quote, hopefully what's going to happen is there's a seamless transfer from your words to the author's words. So if you were to read it out loud to me, it'd be hard for me to know when your words end and when the author's begins. Okay? To work on that, this is kind of what I see as this first example in students that are struggling with this concept, and then below it is going to be an example of how you can actually embed it. So the gingerbread man was a jerk. That's your claim. Your evidence is when he says, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. Page 5. Well, okay, that's fine. So you have your words and then you give me a quote. But, who is he talking to? What's going on in that sentence? He says, you can't catch me, but who's you? What's going on here? In the second one, we have a little bit more context. And the sentence from what the student wrote to what the author wrote is very seamless. So the gingerbread man was a jerk. We still have the same claim. But now the quote is embedded in a sentence that starts with the student's own language. For instance, he taunted the old woman that made him as he left them behind, yelling, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. This is much better. Now we know that it's the old woman that he's saying this to. I'm still a little concerned that the student said them. I think in the original story it's an old woman and an old man, so maybe that's what the student was referring to, but still could be a little bit better. Alright, I think this will probably help you out a little bit. Kind of 3 steps to have in your evidence is the TSQ. Starting off with some sort of transition from your claim, setting up the situation, which, explaining that the old woman is the one that he's talking to, and then finally that quotation. And this is, obviously what's going to back up your claim. Now, it doesn't always have to be transition, then situation, then quotation. Sometimes you'll have a transition, quotation, and then you'll explain the situation in one sentence. It doesn't have to be so rigid. But when you're struggling with this, maybe just stick to the TSQ. Okay? So the transition, like I said, from the claim to your evidence, if you're looking at this from the website, you should see on this page as well below this video a link to helpful transitional words and phrases. If not, go into Google and just say something simple like transitional words and phrases to use in your writing. And I'm sure Google will pop up a bunch of helpful videos. For the situation, oh hey, my wife's home. I'm going to pause this video and I'll be back. Okay, let's pick up where we left off. I think I was on situation. So the situation is explaining what's going on or what's happening in the what's happening in the quotation. So when you're putting in the quotation, you're probably looking at the page or the article, but that doesn't help anyone else while we're reading your essay because we don't know what's going on around that time. So what you need to do is explain what's going on, who's talking to who, what happened before or after, or if it's an article, what does the author say before that point, or what kind of claim is trying to be made. We need some context. We just don't want to quote kind of like plunked in. Okay? And then obviously finally making sure you have the quotation, and then right after the quotation having the parentheses with the author and the page number that you got it from. And then a period at the very end. Very, very end of that sentence. Alright, here's an example of the TSQ. In fact, there's our transition, and then our situation. Mr. Tubble always chugged milk directly from the carton. And then quotation, cups are for wimps. Real men chug whole milk like an athlete chugs water. And then finally, the author's last name, Noy, and then that was from page 92. You don't need to write like PG for page 92. Usually English teachers or most people are smart enough to know that you mean page 92 and you're not saying something like 92 apples or something like that. Also, don't put a quotation, or I'm sorry, a comma here. It's not necessary. It just goes author's last name space page number. Now, usually if you're writing an essay about only one book and you establish which book that is and the author in the intro paragraph, I don't even really think you need the last name. You can just put 92. This is really only necessary if you're talking about two books and there might be some confusion of who, like where this quote came from. But just in case, it's always a good fallback, just last name space page number. Right? And so you see this TSQ and how it works together to embed your sentences a little bit better. I guess that clip art's a picture of Mr. Tubble as well. Right? This is a nice little helpful list of transitions as well. There's more to the bottom of this, but I just couldn't squeeze it onto this page. But like I said, if you put in useful transitions and leaking expressions, you'll see this on the web, or if you're on the website, you'll find that list as well. And they're all very helpful to start your sentences. They're not necessary. Too much of it gets really obnoxious, I guess. So use them sparingly. But sometimes when your sentences feel very disjointed, it's nice to have a transition in there. Things to watch out for is don't say things like this quote shows us, or this quote explains, or here is a quote that shows. We live in the great show me state, so just show me, don't tell me what you're going to do with the quote. Just whenever you're going to say anything like that, cut it out. It's almost exactly, or it's almost always going to be additional information that adds nothing to the text. Don't tell me what it shows, just show. I think that hopefully makes that a little bit easier. And then this is another one that's kind of tough. Yes, milk, period, it does a body good, period. That's how it looks in the book or the article or wherever you find it. But what you've done here is you've effectively ended the sentence here, and then now a new sentence starts with quotation mark, and then parentheses, page 12, and then another sentence starts. Well, this 12 refers back to this quote, so you can't put that period there. Yes, it appeared in the book like that, but you need to move that period to the outside. Please make sure you move that out there. Now, let's say they did like milk, it does a body good, and then it's like a question mark. You can keep that in there as long as you have that period right after that. But if there's a comma there, get rid of it. If there's a semicolon, get rid of it. Don't put an ellipses. Don't put like dot, dot, dot. Just end it right there. With fluidity, the idea is to embed that quotation into the middle sentence if possible. So in a lot of these examples I've shown you, the quote comes at the very end, and then what you said comes in the beginning. That's fine. It's always good. But sometimes when people are still struggling with transitioning and making it seem more fluid, it's more helpful if you move the quote to the middle of the sentence, because then that helps us with this idea of if read aloud, it's hard to tell where your words and the author's begin. And that's a really helpful trick that like you don't have to do every single time, but it's helpful when you do attempt it. And it also makes sure that you focus on using just the most important words. So for an example, choosing a team to root for would be simple. That's your claim. Consequently, she always chose the team with the brightest colors to win the game. And then you still include the quote where the team with the brightest colors came from. I like this because, like I said, it makes sure that you only use the most important part of the sentence. So whenever you can, try and use as little of the text as possible that only gives the main idea of what backs up your claim. That's the job of the evidence, not to take up a lot of space in your actual evidence. And so I hope this video was helpful to you. There are also things on this page that will be helpful as well. There's like a little cheat sheet that might be helpful as well for other questions that always pop up. This obviously this video can't deal with everything, but the best thing you can do is if there are model papers that I have given you or your teacher has given you, please look them over and see what are the preferences of that teacher. But hopefully this video gives you kind of like a primer to start with. And good luck on those essays.
All right, so the space we're going to, there are more videos. The space we're going to live in for probably the next 20 minutes is practicing one more essay and going back to the PDF that we're using for the work on Friday. So real quick, that PDF was in the link I sent out after class on Monday. It takes you to this PDF document, the sample extended response passages and prompts for classroom practice, RLA. This is the same format that the GED RLA test is going to have. So this is really solid. This is a really solid practice format. Again, they require 4 to 7 paragraphs of 3 to 7 sentences each. So we're going to strive for a 4-paragraph with about 4 sentences per paragraph. So we're going to shoot for 4 paragraphs, get in, get out, do everything we need to do. We're not going to shoot for this 7 maximum length. It is not scored on length. It is scored on does it have structure and does it do everything that the prompt asked it to do. So you can get a perfect score on a 4-paragraph essay. You can get a mediocre score on a 7-paragraph essay. The length is not what you're being scored on. If you write under 4, unless you write under 4 paragraphs, in which case you might get dinged for that. So tonight we're going to look at, or today, or in the morning, as he said, we're going to look at the passage number 5, hosting the Olympics. So I went ahead and I grabbed these and I dropped them into our own document so we can go through and highlight them the way that you would highlight them on the test itself. So we're going to go ahead and go through this, and we're going to answer this just as if it were an essay that we're doing. So it is currently 7:13, where our goal is to do this in well under the 45 minutes of time given us. So let's take a look at this prompt. Analyze the arguments presented in the 2 guest columns. So we're reading these guest columns in a paper or something. In your response, develop an argument in which you explain how one position is better supported than the other. Incorporate relevant and specific evidence from both sources to support your argument. Remember, the better argued position is not necessarily the position with which you agree. The task should take approximately 45 minutes to complete. All right, so we're going to shoot for doing this in less time than that, and I'm going to talk through every step. So the first thing I need to do is start with source material 1 and begin getting all of my claims and all of my supports together. So I'm going to highlight my claims in green, I'm going to highlight supports in yellow, and I'm going to highlight reasoning and extra explanations of supports in orange. So I'm going to use green, yellow, and orange. And those are kind of the colors that I'm comfortable and familiar using for my claim, my evidence, and my reasoning. So let's get going. This first column is titled, Let's Put Our City on the Map. We're talking about hosting the Olympics, so I'm guessing this person is for hosting the Olympics. It's Igor Kresweski, as they're a CEO. So that's kind of who's writing this one. So let's jump into it. Our mayor and city council are debating the wisdom of putting together a bid to host the Summer Olympics. If they decide to go forward, it will be the smartest decision our city has ever made. All right, immediately I have a claim because I'm saying this will be the smartest decision our city has ever made. So that's in green. As chief executive of a company that develops large shopping centers, I understand the hard work that goes into planning an enormous project, but I also know that the rewards are worth it. So even though this is still our first paragraph, it's kind of an intro stuff, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is evidence because when he says, I'm the chief executive of a company, this is somebody who has some experience with the topic they're talking about. So that's pretty solid. So I'm just going to underline that and put that in italics or something because I like that. I'll come back to that. Let's continue reading. Many people might think that hosting an international event of this size is too expensive. All right, so we have a claim. And I really like that because we're kind of talking about the opponent already. We're kind of looking at the opposing side of the argument immediately. So that's pretty good. So let's see what he does with it. And there's no question that there are significant costs at the outset. All right, well, we're actually providing evidence for the other side right now. So if he can come back and strike that down and respond to it, then he's got a really good argument because he's incorporating the counter argument. But these kind of events bring positive attention to their host cities, attract visitors and their wallets before, during, and long afterwards. Ooh, that's nice. So with this reasoning, he does a good job of kind of knocking down the counterclaim that he has here. That's nice. That's pretty solid. That's pretty good arguing right now. This is doing good work. Those tourist dollars benefit the city at every level, from hotels to taxi cabs. Right, that's a claim that the money benefits the city. As one Canadian planner wrote after the 2010 Winter Olympics, looking back at other Olympic cities such as Barcelona, Salt Lake City, and Sydney, all have established themselves as world cities through the hosting of this major event. All right, so that's evidence supporting the benefit to the city. Okay, we're doing some good sandwich stuff here, with a claim followed by evidence followed by reasoning, with claim followed by evidence. While some residents may be inconvenienced by stadium construction periods or temporary road closures, hold up, that's a negative. He's giving us more counter argument. These nuisances are more than balanced by the excitement and sense of community pride engendered by becoming a host city. Nice. So he responds to the opposing side again. He's doing a really good job of responding to his opponent's argument. So like, if I decide that this is the better one, I'm probably going to mention that. Think too of the jobs these projects provide, improving our local economy, and because of the number of volunteers needed to carry out a huge event, there are opportunities for thousands of citizens to get involved. Nice, so that's more evidence. Talking about the community. This sense of pitching in often leads to a general rise in volunteerism, and even more explanation and reasoning to support that evidence. What I like about this is, think of the jobs, right? Think of the volunteers. Think of the what do you say, community pride. So he's giving a lot of things that you're going to get in the community, and then he gives further reasoning. So this is a tight paragraph that starts with responding to the opponent's argument. Then he gives specific examples. Nice, that's solid. And then his last paragraph. Finally, and maybe most important, when cities host events like the Olympics, they gain not only new sports venues that can be used for years, but they are also motivated to carry out those road and transportation projects that they've been putting off. So this is kind of a claim, stuff that cities get. So after the event, we all live proudly in a better and more efficient city. It's a win-win. More evidence, and then it's a win-win is a claim because you're saying that it is that. All right, so this is pretty tight. This is a pretty tight guest column here. We start out by directly addressing our opponent. We continue to kind of directly address the opponent, and then we just sort of talk about positives. And we have some good evidence in here, including a good quote from a Canadian planner, so from a specific person. A name would make that even better, but the quote itself is a solid quote. and as long as it's one Canadian planner, that's pretty specific. Okay, let's move on to source material number 2. The column is titled "The Olympics Are a Losing Proposition" by Genevieve DuPont, Chief Economist, Bennett and Green Investments, the Portland Gazette. So this is another good source. This person also probably knows what they're talking about. So let's see how they argue. She says, "When we drive around our city, it is doubtful that many of us say, why not spend billions of dollars constructing new stadiums and swimming pools?" Okay, so I don't have a claim yet. And yet, isn't that what the bidding to host the Olympic Games boils down to? All right, so my claim is actually going to be this. Isn't that what the bidding to host the Olympic Games boils down to? And my evidence is kind of weakly in front of my claim, what people might say, but what people don't say. So this is kind of a weird construction. We have two sort of rhetorical questions starting us out. If you watch the Monday one, you know I'm not a huge fan of rhetorical questions, especially in argumentative writing, because if you're going to ask a rhetorical question, you might as well make a statement, and the statement's going to be stronger than a rhetorical question. So let's continue on and see what they have. Let's start with the cost of building facilities for the events. So this is just kind of a statement, but it's not really a claim. It's not saying that the cost is high. I mean, it's implying that, but it's not super strong. Of course, we can use the stadiums that we already have, but many more will be required. All right, there's a claim. As other economists have pointed out, the costs of the Olympics have a tendency to rise over time and be much greater than expected. All right, so this is evidence, but there's something that pops out to me immediately that's pretty weak. Who are other economists? Who are these other economists? That's pretty vague. Other economists is not a specific person. It's just like I found some economists who agree with me. It's not very strong. Let's keep going. In some host cities, this has meant an increase in taxes to cover the losses, despite promoters' rosy promises. All right, so the whole increase in taxes thing, that's legit. That's fair. That's a good support. But again, though, we have vague language in some host cities. Which host cities? Be specific. There's no reason why this person couldn't be specific here and here, but they weren't. So that immediately weakens their argument. It immediately weakens this column. So I'm going to kind of keep that in mind. Right now, I'm thinking this is the weaker of the two. So I'm just kind of looking for reasons why I don't like this one. Moving on, proponents claim that tourists will flock to our region and spend their money here. So it's a claim, and it kind of shares the same problem as the evidence from the last sentence. Who are these proponents? Why not give them names? If I can't give them specific names, this is a pretty weak statement because it could be anybody, and there's no way for me to check it. Moving on. While this may be true during the games themselves, there's little evidence that this carries over to increased tourism afterwards. All right, so this is actually another claim that there isn't evidence of tourists flocking afterwards. So it's a claim following a claim, which is also kind of weak. Then this looks good. Tourism after the 2008 Beijing Games, for example, rose only 2%. Oh, well, there we go. That's a good piece of information. Then there's an additional cost of security for visitors and athletes while they're here. That's another piece of evidence. But these two pieces of evidence, this one here, tourism went up, ties to this one, tourists flocking. But then the cost of security, that's not tied to the rest of this paragraph very well. There's not a lot of reason for this to be here. It's not a reasoning. It's not explaining tourism going up. It's not explaining the importance of tourism going up or how that's a good thing. It's just another negative, and it's just kind of another loose piece of evidence just kind of thrown in there. So that's not great. How about the other economic selling points, like job creation? I mean, how about that? It's another rhetorical question. Job creation, I mean, it could be a good thing, but this is just kind of a rhetorical question thrown out there. If you wanted to phrase this in a statement, you could say something like, Job creation is a false positive for hosting the games, or job creation isn't a real selling point. But when you phrase it as a question, it invites your audience to like just kind of sit in that question with you, and it's not a statement, and it's not a claim, it's a question. While construction companies would benefit in the short term, those jobs are temporary. So that's a claim that those jobs are temporary. And what do we do with a giant stadium once the Olympics are over? All right, that's another rhetorical question, but I'll give it to them as a piece of evidence because I don't want to highlight every rhetorical question as negative. And that's a fair question, and I agree with it. Would it become a monument to fiscal foolishness? All right, that's bad because if you're calling your opponent foolish or fiscally foolish, I mean that's name calling, and that's just not a strong argument. The 90,000-seat Bird's Nest Stadium built in Beijing at a cost of $480 million plus $11 million a year since then to maintain is now an empty museum piece, according to the New York Times. Well, that's a great piece of evidence. There's no explanation of it. There's nothing to follow it up, but that's a great piece of evidence. So, I mean, this lacks explanation right here. If that was going to be part of a good argument, it would need to have some kind of follow-up explanation, but it doesn't. So it's not great. Let's return to our drive around the city. This is fluff. That's just fluff words. That's not a claim. That's just they could have started this here and been perfectly fine. Aren't we more likely to say, let us use our resources to repair the sidewalks, replace that damaged bridge, and improve our schools? All right, that's a claim. Aren't we more likely to do that? Aren't we, though? Question mark. Again, we're making claims as questions. It's just not super great. It's not super strong writing. These are projects that benefit the entire community, not just a handful of construction firms and developers. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right evidence. Seen from nearly every angle, hosting a large international sporting event is a losing proposition, and our city leaders should nip this idea in the bud. So of this last bit, we have kind of a claim that it's a losing proposition, but everything else is fluff. So I feel like I have a clear winner and a clear loser. So what we're going to do now is we're going to argue that source material number 1 is the stronger source material, and source material number 2 is the weaker source material. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to start out. These are guessed columns, so I'm going to say in the guessed column, and then the title of that first one, which was, let's put our city on the map. I just copied this title, and I'm going to paste it down here. You have those tools on the GED also, so definitely use those when you're just moving information around like quotes or titles. The author, I have his name over here written down, Igor Krezweski, makes a strong argument for hosting the Olympic Games in his city. So that's what I think he does. I think he did a good job. And so I'm going to go back up for my first piece of evidence. Oh yeah, I liked that he is the chief executive of a company. Like his job allows him to kind of be an authority figure on large developments. So I'm going to start there. As the chief executive, large company, is Wesky, and I think I can do a quote here. So I'm going to go back up. What did he say? He said, I understand the hard work that goes into planning enormous projects. So let's say he understands the hard work that goes into planning enormous projects. I'm going to do quote. End quote. So there's one grammatical problem with this. Krezweski understand doesn't work. So I'm going to add an S here. Anytime you need to do any editing inside of a quote, you can to make it grammatically correct. You just need to put whatever you edit in brackets. That's fancy schmancy stuff. You don't need to do quotes like that. I'm going to show you other ways to do it, but I also wanted to show you a way to embed a quote that's kind of natural in the grammar of the sentence. So I have my evidence. Now I need some reasoning. So let me explain this evidence a little bit by saying, with his career being in building large structures, He knows what he is talking about. And it's a valid authority on the subject. He gets it. That's what he does. This is his day job. So let's look at what we just did here. We started off with our claim. This one's best. This article is the best article. We're arguing that. Our first piece of evidence is pulled directly from that article, where he says he understands the hard work that goes into planning an enormous project. And then I explained my evidence when I said why that's important. So let's go back up and find another reason why that's a good article. So the next paragraph, many people think that hosting a national event is too oh yeah, so he's like directly addressing his opponent right away. He's jumping right into the fight, and he's saying like, here's what my opponent thinks, and then he's shooting it down. So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna come back down here and I'm gonna say one of the strengths of this column is that the author directly addressed his opponent's arguments when he said, what did he say? I'm going to use his evidence. He said, there's no question there are significant costs. So he's like, yeah, I'll give you that. There's significant costs at the outset. So I like that. He's like, he jumps straight into it. He's like, yeah, it is expensive. So I'm going to explain why that's good. And it's good because, by naming and responding to the other side, he strengthened his own argument while shutting down the opposition. Yeah, that's what he did. He did good. I'm going to add another one because I liked something he said up there. He said he used this quote, and I thought that quote was good. And I like what he said, that some cities become world cities. I like that from that quote, so I'm gonna throw that in here. I'm gonna say he even went on to explain how cities become known as world cities after hosting the event. All right, so what have I done? I have a claim. It's strong because he addresses the opponent's argument. I have my evidence. And then I explain my evidence in 2 sentences. You can over explain your evidence. That's cool. If you add that second orange sentence, that second piece of reasoning, that only helps. You're not going to hurt yourself by adding more reasoning. And I need one more reason why that one's strong, and then I'm going to finish out with my 4th paragraph being all about why the other one kind of sucks. So let's go back up to the first one. What's he doing next? He says, while some residents may be inconvenienced, these nuisances are balanced by the excitement. Okay, so he's still talking about the opposing argument. He kind of stays in that mode. That's solid. So I'm going to start with his name. What's it? Wesky. Continues to directly address So he continues to directly address the opponent in the next paragraph by stating, and I'm going to go back up to my yellow and find something he says. In that next paragraph, he says, well, I can just grab this first one. He says some residents, might be inconvenienced, and he kind of says, that's a thing that might happen. It's fair. And I'm going to explain why that's good, and go ahead and say like what he does after that. So he kind of follows that up with a list of reasons why it's worth that inconvenience. He says so he follows that negative statement with a list of positive outcomes. or the local economy, including, what's he say? Let me go back up. What did he say? He said a couple different things. He said, so your jobs, and he said volunteers, and he said community pride. And I like that phrase. He's got that community pride. So I'm going to say including more jobs, volunteers, and community pride. And that can be extra fancy and put community pride in quotes because that's literally the phrase he used. All right, so what did I just do? This is what I'm talking about in this paragraph, him directly addressing the opposing argument. This is my evidence of him doing that, where he says some residents might be inconvenienced. And this is me explaining why it was strong, because he goes on to say all those positives about the impact on communities. So I got 3 paragraphs here. This is okay. This is doing what it needs to do. I have been doing the work of incorporating relevant and specific evidence from both sources to explain my argument. I have been explaining why one position is better than the other. I do need specific evidence from both sources, so I need to get some evidence from that second source to close this out. This is all right now. I'm pointing out, why I think this first one is stronger, but I do need to address why the other one's weaker to get full credit on this essay. So let's look at this other one. Where do I want to attack this? I only want to do 1 paragraph for this one. So let's say, yeah, I think for me, the thing that sticks out to me is just like these vague other economists or some host cities or proponents claim. So I'm going to talk about how the problem with this other one is it's vague. So I'm going to say the column, this other column, the column written by, I don't need to memorize names because I can copy paste, Genevieve DuPont, titled I'm going to grab this, Control C. Was a weaker column, primarily because the evidence was so vague. And it was vague evidence. I'm going to say, for example, just to be kind of basic with this one, the author uses generalizations when quoting let's say, in some host cities, this has meant an increase in taxes to cover the losses despite promoters' rosy promises. Yeah. All right, I just fixed my when quoting because this wasn't a quote. This was just the author saying something they weren't quoting. Yeah, so that's general because it's just in some host cities, like where, what host cities. So that's what I'm going to explain with my reasoning here. I'm going to say, now this statement doesn't tell the reader which cities are some host cities and fails to provide specific evidence. Sorry for spelling. It's late. All right. So what do I have here? I have my claim. The problem here is vagueness. I have an example of a place where they are vague in their writing. And then I have my reasoning for why it is vague. You could throw a conclusion paragraph into this, a really quick one, basically about like why you think vague writing is bad, or why you think that addressing your opponent is good, and just kind of reiterate why you think the let's put our city on the map column is better. But right now, we have done everything we've been asked to do. We have evidence from the first, from the argument that we believe is best, specific evidence that supports our argument that the first article is best. I want to draw your attention to the embedded quotes now before we end this lesson. And so for this first embedded quote, it is baked into the sentence as part of the sentence. There's no comma. As the chief executive of a large company, Kreswesky understands the hard work that goes into planning. This is one way to do it. This is the fancier way without a comma. And you can only do that if there's not a verb. The next one is a more classic one, and I would recommend doing this if you don't do a lot of writing for work, because this is an easier one to memorize how it works. You just say the name of the author, and then you say said or says or believes, and then you have a comma, and then you have the quotes, and then you say what they said. And that's it. And then you exit the quotes after your sentence is done. That's the whole level of complexity there. You don't have to know grammar the way you have to know grammar if you're going to incorporate something naturally like this. For this one, you just need to remember, he said or she said, or he argues or she argues, comma, quotation marks, then put the quote, and you're totally solid. Another way that you can get quotes into your essay is if you just drop them in and then put quotes around them. So like single word quotes are fine because it draws attention to the fact that you paid attention to the text. So he even went on to explain how cities would become known as world cities after hosting the event. So this phrase world cities belongs to the author of the text, not me. So I'm saying that I recognize I'm using his language by putting this in quotes, and that counts as a quote. That counts as evidence. So you can do it this way. You can do it this way. I would recommend doing both. This way is a little bit cheaper than doing these bigger quotes. They're gonna recognize this format here as the best. So they're gonna see that and recognize what you're doing a lot more easily than the small single word stuff. Another example. This one's classic by stating. The phrase stating is my introductory verb. Says my introductory verb. And then I did the same thing down here with community pride that I did above with world cities, where I just took words from the author and I put them in quotes when they fit my sentence. He follows the negative statement with a list of positive outcomes for the local economy, including more jobs, volunteers, and community pride. So I put community pride in quotes because I wanted to emphasize that that's what this person believes and that that's their language. The column, and then in my last one, the column written by Genevieve DuPont titled "The Olympics Are a Losing Proposition" was weaker. So this one is also kind of classic, saying. The author is saying, and then I jump into the quote. And then I just realized I did this 3 times. This one also has a quote with just the phrase in it. So everything in bold on here is me using evidence from the texts, and then everything in orange after those evidences is me explaining my evidence and why it is stronger in that first text. I hope this was valuable for you. It is 7:42 now, so I went a little bit longer than I wanted with this, but I basically I basically put the thing together in about the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then took about 20 minutes to explain why what I did what I did. I hope this is valuable for you. Quick recap of the work for the week. On Tuesday, I had a video for you. On Thursday, I wanted you to read this article from Reuters and find 5 pieces of evidence, just like you would be finding those pieces of evidence, those yellow pieces of evidence in your essay texts. And then on Friday, I wanted you to choose from this PDF, choose one of these prompts, and go ahead and give it a shot. Try to find evidence and argue which one is stronger in a 4 to 5 paragraph format, and give it a shot. That is the work for the week. Thank you so much. This is class 9. I have 2 more classes next week. We're going to be looking at some practice tests, going through those practice tests and talking about why some answers are correct, why some answers are wrong, and just kind of getting into the mode of answering questions that are GED style questions correctly, and thinking about why they're right, why they're wrong. Well, I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.